As a teenager, Euphoria star Angus Cloud survived a life-threatening head injury after falling into a construction site, fracturing his skull and requiring emergency brain surgery, leaving a long scar along his head. He was later discovered on the street with no prior acting experience and cast in Euphoria, where he became known for playing a drug dealer. But in July of 2023 in Oakland, the 25-year-old died from an accidental overdose, including fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and benzodiazepines, a lethal combination that can quickly lead to respiratory failure. His death came just days after burying his father, who died from cancer, and he had returned to the home where his father passed, reportedly struggling with grief and mental health in the days leading up to his death. Eerily, he previously said he wanted to portray Mac Miller in a biopic, who died in 2018 from a similar fentanyl-related overdose. In 2018 in California, 23-year-old Angela Hernandez drove off a cliff along Highway 1, plunging about 200 feet into the ocean below. The impact left her with a brain hemorrhage, broken ribs, a collapsed lung, and broken collarbones. After regaining consciousness inside the submerged vehicle, she managed to escape before it sank, swim to shore, and climb onto a narrow rocky ledge beneath the cliff. With no supplies and severely injured, she survived for 7 days by drinking fresh water that dripped down from moss and vegetation on the rock face. She was eventually spotted by passing hikers along the roadway, who alerted authorities, leading to her rescue and evacuation to a hospital. In 2008, aspiring filmmaker Mark Twitchell from Edmonton became obsessed with the TV show Dexter and allegedly tried to recreate the fictional killer's methods in real life. The 29-year-old had rented a garage space to film his movie House of Cards, a short film about a killer luring men to his garage before murdering them. Investigators later said the garage itself had been transformed into a real-life kill room, with plastic sheeting covering the walls and floor to contain blood and make cleanup easier. Using fake online dating profiles, Twitchell lured men to the garage while pretending to be a woman. One man managed to survive after violently fighting his way out. 38-year-old Johnny Altinger wasn't so lucky, disappearing after arriving for what he believed was a date and was never seen alive again. Investigators said Twitchell murdered and dismembered him before dumping the remains. Police also discovered a disturbing document on his computer called SK Confessions, where he wrote in graphic detail about the thrill of stalking and killing victims. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 2011 and sentenced to life in prison. In April of 2023, 56-year-old Michael Dale paid an OF model more than $11,000 for an extreme fetish session at his home in Escondido, California. Dale reportedly requested a series of disturbing acts, including being wrapped tightly in plastic like a mummy and having boots glued to his feet. Prosecutors later said the session escalated far beyond what had been agreed to, with Dale eventually found unresponsive with a plastic bag and duct tape over his face, while the woman allegedly filmed parts of the encounter. He was declared brain dead the following day after suffering fatal suffocation. Michaela Reilersdam, a 32-year-old mother of 3, was initially charged with second-degree murder before pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter in 2026. Built under Saddam Hussein in 1986, Iraq's Mosul Dam is considered one of the most dangerous dams on Earth because it was built atop a foundation of dissolving gypsum rock that constantly erodes beneath it. To keep the dam stable, crews have spent decades continuously pumping grout into the foundation to fill growing voids, with engineers at times injecting dozens of tons of grout per day as part of the around-the-clock maintenance operation. U.S. officials and engineers have warned that if the dam were to catastrophically fail, a massive wall of water could slam into Mosul within hours before surging toward Baghdad, with some worst-case estimates claiming up to 1.5 million people could die in the resulting floods. Here's a photo of a young girl in Lopburi, Thailand carrying an airsoft gun to defend her food from the city's massive population of wild macaque monkeys. After years of tourists feeding them, Lopburi's monkey population completely exploded, and during COVID, food shortages caused large groups of starving monkeys to become increasingly aggressive toward businesses and pedestrians. Videos from the city have shown hundreds of macaques swarming streets, fighting each other in massive brawls, and snatching food directly from people's hands, leading some locals to carry weapons just to walk through certain areas safely. 1981, 25-year-old John Hinckley Jr. attempted to assassinate U.S. President Ronald Reagan outside of a hotel in Washington, D.C., after becoming obsessively fixated on actress Jodie Foster and believing the attack would impress her. Hinckley fired 6 shots within seconds, seriously wounding Reagan after a bullet ricocheted into his chest and narrowly missed his heart. Press Secretary James Brady was shot in the head and left permanently disabled, with his death in 2014 later being ruled a homicide linked to the shooting, while a Secret Service agent and police officer, were also wounded. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent decades confined to a psychiatric hospital before being gradually released under strict supervision, while Jodie Foster was in fact not impressed by the attack. David Holmes was a longtime stunt double for Daniel Radcliffe during the Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows era, before a horrific on-set accident during a stunt rehearsal in 2009 left him permanently paralyzed. Holmes broke his neck after being violently thrown into a wall while practicing a flying sequence, suffering a catastrophic spinal injury that ended his stunt career at just 25 years old. Despite the life-altering injury, Holmes remained close friends with Radcliffe for years afterward, with Radcliffe later helping to produce the documentary David Holmes, The Boy Who Lived, about his life, recovery, and the devastating accident that changed everything. A popular mushroom in China known as the little white mushroom has repeatedly poisoned people when eaten undercooked, triggering a rare form of toxic hallucination known as Lilliputian hallucinations. Victims reportedly begin seeing swarms of tiny human-like or fantasy creatures crawling under doors, scaling walls, or clinging to furniture as the mushroom's toxins affect the brain. The bizarre poisonings became so notorious in parts of China's Yunnan province that hospitals documented countless unrelated people describing nearly identical visions of miniature elf-like figures during their episodes.
It has to be liquidated. We have to get rid of that. That's a burden. We can we're just we can't buy it.
It's Dr. Paul.
That was the moment former presidential candidate Ron Paul suffered a stroke during a live 2020 interview after the 85-year-old began slurring his words and speaking incoherently before becoming visibly disoriented. From the person experiencing it, a stroke can feel terrifying and confusing, as parts of the brain suddenly begin shutting down from a lack of blood flow, sometimes causing speech to not make sense, thoughts to become scrambled, vision to blur, or parts of the body to suddenly feel numb, weak, or impossible to control. The live stream quickly cut away as viewers realized something was seriously wrong. Ron was later hospitalized, where doctors confirmed he had suffered a stroke, though he eventually recovered and returned to public appearances. In 2010, 45-year-old Malcolm MacDonald from Norfolk, England, developed a severe blood infection that caused his Count Shaftula to turn black and eventually detach from his body. After years of depression and isolation, surgeons created a replacement using skin, blood vessels, and nerves taken from his arm, where the new organ remained attached for about 6 years while it developed its own blood supply. Multiple delays, including medical complications and the COVID-19 pandemic, reportedly left MacDonald living with an Obi-Wan Kenobi hanging from his forearm for years, before surgeons were finally able to complete the reconstruction procedure. This man was forced to wear a wig his entire life for one of the most disturbing reasons imaginable. In 1927, 5-year-old Vertus Hardiman was taken with several other black children in rural Mississippi to what parents were told was a harmless treatment for scalp ringworm. Instead, physicians connected to the U.S. Public Health Service exposed the children to massive amounts of radiation in an experiment that blasted their scalps with X-rays powerful enough to destroy hair follicles. Soon afterward, the children reportedly suffered agonizing burns, open sores, swelling, infections, and patches of skin that peeled away from their heads. Hardiman later described the smell of his scalp burning and said the pain became so severe he could barely sleep. Large sections of his scalp were permanently scarred and left unable to grow hair again, forcing him to wear wigs and hats for the rest of his life to hide the damage and humiliation. Some of the other children reportedly developed tumors and chronic health problems in the years that followed. Hardiman rarely spoke publicly about the experiment until later on in life, but despite decades of pain and trauma, he reportedly still believed bitterness and hatred were pointless. 11-year-old Kevin Gabor, aka Kevin G, is a young TikToker that was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, aka brittle bone disease, rare genetic disorder that leaves his bones so fragile they can fracture from just minor movements or pressure. Over the course of his life, Kevin has reportedly endured countless broken bones, surgeries, hospitalizations, chronic pain, and severe mobility limitations caused by the disorder. As his videos began gaining attention online, he also became the target of cruel harassment, with trolls mocking his appearance, accusing him of faking his condition, and mass reporting his accounts in attempts to get them banned. Despite the constant physical pain and online bullying, Kevin built a large following on social media through singing videos and clips documenting his daily life while living with the debilitating disorder. You can actually die from eating nothing but rabbit. The meat is so lean that your body can't get enough fat to survive, leading to a condition called rabbit starvation or protein poisoning. Even if you eat large amounts, you'll slowly waste away, suffering nausea, diarrhea, and exhaustion before eventually dying of malnutrition. In April of 1975, Ugandan dictator Idi Amin reportedly gave a speech on the radio praising Adolf Hitler and expressing regret that only 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. Amin also reportedly discussed plans to build a statue of Hitler in Uganda, though the idea was later abandoned after he was informed that Hitler also held racist beliefs towards black people. In Addo Elephant National Park, South Africa, a lioness named Josie went blind around age 12, likely from untreated eye disease such as cataracts or glaucoma. In the wild, that's almost always a death sentence since lionesses rely on vision to hunt and avoid threats. But instead of abandoning her, her 2 adult daughters stayed by her side for the next 5 years. They guided her using contact calls, flanked her while moving so she wouldn't walk into danger, and shared their kills so she could eat despite being unable to hunt. Thanks to her daughters, she survived like this until about age 17, which is already near the upper limit of a wild lion's lifespan. 2008, on a beach in Montauk, Long Island, New York, a bloated, hairless carcass washed ashore with no clear identifying features, quickly dubbed the Montauk Monster. The body was already in an advanced state of decomposition, likely causing the loss of fur and the distorted shape of the head and limbs. As photos spread online, some speculated it was an escaped or discarded experiment from the nearby Plum Island, home to a government animal disease research facility, or something connected to rumored labs in Montauk. Wildlife experts said it was most likely a raccoon or dog altered by decay and water exposure, which can strip fur and change how the skull appears. No official identification was ever confirmed, and the body disappeared shortly after being photographed, leaving the Montauk Monster unresolved and open to speculation. This was the moment a jewelry store was wiped out in just 30 seconds. In 2025 in Fremont, California, nearly 24 thieves stormed into Kumar Jewelers at once, armed with hammers and tools. Within seconds, they began smashing display cases and sweeping jewelry into bags as employees were forced to stand back. By the time it was over, $1.7 million worth of jewelry, about 80% of the store's inventory, was wiped out in just over a minute. The group dispersed in multiple getaway cars and several arrests were later made, but most of the crew remains unidentified and the majority of the stolen jewelry has never been found. In New York City, Darius McCollum developed an obsessive fixation on the transit system that led him to repeatedly impersonate MTA employees and take control of buses and subway trains. Beginning as a teenager, he was arrested more than 30 times after entering restricted areas, operating vehicles, and running full routes while delivering accurate announcements and staying on schedule. He wasn't stealing the vehicles or trying to escape, he was operating the job with precision. Each incident still carried real risk, and over time the pattern didn't stop. He continued being arrested well into adulthood, spending years cycling through jail and psychiatric evaluations. Despite national attention and a 2016 documentary about his case, there was still no long-term solution put in place, as he remained stuck between the transit system he was obsessed with and a justice system that had no idea how to effectively handle the situation. Steve Irwin spent his entire life working hands-on with animals that could kill him, and he openly said that if he ever died, it would likely be from wildlife. Throughout his career, he was constantly bitten, cut, and injured by snakes, lizards, and crocodiles. There were multiple close calls where crocodiles snapped inches from his body. He regularly handled some of the most venomous snakes in the world in remote areas, where a single bite could have easily been fatal before help arrived. This was one of the last photos ever taken of Steve off the coast of Queensland in 2006 before a stingray struck him with its tail, sending a barb through his chest and directly into his heart. Fatal stingray injuries like this are extremely rare, with fewer than 20 documented deaths worldwide since the 1950s. The barb was quickly pulled out during the emergency, which likely accelerated the bleeding, but the damage to his heart was already catastrophic either way. The moment was caught on camera, and the footage was reportedly destroyed before it was ever released. According to those present, his final words were reportedly, "I'm dying," before he went into cardiac arrest. The stingray is believed to have acted defensively as Steve approached from above. Despite decades of surviving encounters with some of the most dangerous animals on Earth, Steve died from a single rare defensive strike, the exact kind of risk he had always accepted. As a child, Michael's father Joseph would constantly torment him about his appearance, often calling him Fat Nose. Michael went on to have 4 rhinoplasties and was insecure about his appearance for his entire life. According to his former doctor, Conrad Murray, Michael's father chemically castrated him when he was a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. On one occasion in the 1960s, Joe wanted to teach his kids a lesson about leaving the windows open at night. So when little Michael was asleep, his father climbed through the window wearing a mask and screamed at him. From that point on, Michael would have recurring nightmares about being kidnapped from his bedroom. But the abuse didn't stop there. Joe would also hold onto a belt while the Jackson 5 rehearsed, ready to strike his children if one of them made a mistake. Michael was reportedly so terrified of his father that he would sometimes throw up just from merely being in his presence. He once said he felt the safest while performing on stage since his father wouldn't be able to beat him in front of a crowd. From a very young age, Michael described being forced into long, exhausting rehearsals for hours at a time, completely missing out on a normal childhood. He said watching other kids play from the window while he rehearsed was one of the memories that stayed with him the most.
Do what? I shot Sergeant Gibson. I pulled a gun on him. Can you investigate me? Is he breathing? He just fell out.
That was the voice of police officer Michael Rusk calling 911 in James City County, Virginia in 2023, telling dispatch he had just shot his own sergeant after claiming he was about to be sexually assaulted. According to Rusk, Gibson had made prior unwanted advances, and that night the situation escalated when Gibson allegedly tried to force himself onto him. During the struggle, Rusk said he repeatedly told him to stop before pulling out his gun and firing several shots. Michael's father, Jason Rusk, said he told him about unwanted attention he received from his superior officer leading up to the shooting, and that he'd reported it to others in the department several times.
There was a year's worth of grooming that had taken place. Extremely inappropriate touching, stalking, the grooming, the previous to the incident assaults.
Here's a video showing the officers at the bar prior to the shooting, where Gibson gets out of his seat to sit next to Rusk before reaching over to hold his hand, which Rusk appears to turn down. Then about an hour before the shooting, the two can be seen outside before apparently leaving together. Gibson puts his hand on Rusk's shoulder, and Rusk responds by pushing him away and pointing a finger in his face. It's unclear what happened next, but after the shooting, Rusk made this claim to the dispatcher.
I told him to stop. He kept going. Help me. Help.
Gibson was hit several times and survived after emergency surgery. When officers arrived, Rusk was still on the scene and was immediately taken into custody. Investigators said the physical evidence didn't fully support a clear-cut self-defense claim, leading to Rusk being charged with several felonies. In 2024, Rusk took a plea deal, avoiding active prison time, but losing his career in law enforcement and his right to carry a firearm. During an interview shortly before his death, Michael admitted he would often talk to child mannequins just to feel less alone. He would also frequently cry at the sight of kids playing in the park, since it was something Michael would never experience himself. Michael had a meeting scheduled at the top of one of the Twin Towers on 9/11. After talking on the phone with his mom late into the night, he overslept and missed the appointment. Because of that phone call, he later credited his mother with saving his life. Here's a 1985 prediction of what Michael Jackson would look like in the year 2000 versus what he actually ended up looking like. As a result of a combination of skin conditions and body dysmorphia, Jackson went through nearly 100 procedures over 30 years trying to achieve his idea of perfection. In 2003, an entire supermarket was shut down so that Michael could live out his lifelong dream of shopping like an ordinary person. All the other shoppers were either paid actors or his friends, and they paid no attention to Michael. He played around the store like a child and even compared the experience to going to Disneyland. Daryl Sheets, known as the Gambler from Storage Wars, was found dead on April 22, 2026 inside his Arizona home at age 67. Police responded around 2 a.m. to reports of a deceased individual and discovered his body after he had apparently turned the gun on himself. He was pronounced dead at the scene and the case remains under investigation. In the days leading up to his death, at least one former co-star claimed he'd been dealing with severe online harassment, and authorities are reportedly looking into possible cyberbullying as a contributing factor. His death came after years of serious health issues, including a massive heart attack in 2019 and ongoing heart complications that forced him to step away from television. Sheets had been one of the most recognizable figures on the show, appearing in over 160 episodes, and once even claimed he unknowingly bought a storage unit that contained a plastic-wrapped human body tied to a murder case. After leaving TV, he lived in Arizona running an antique shop, largely out of the spotlight until his death. During the shooting of a Pepsi commercial in 1983, a pyrotechnic malfunction set Michael's hair on fire, leaving him with second and third degree burns to his scalp. He continued performing for a few seconds before realizing what was happening, and the injury led to lasting pain, baldness, and medical complications. But instead of suing Pepsi, he asked the company to fund the creation of a burn treatment center. Through the late 1880s and into the 1990s, at the peak of his career, Jackson donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charities, including children's hospitals, AIDS research, and disaster relief, even as his own life was becoming increasingly unstable behind the scenes. Around the same period, he founded the Heal the World Foundation, providing food, aid, and medical support to children in war zones in impoverished regions, including efforts connected to the Rwandan genocide. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, he quietly paid for medical treatments for children, including covering hospital bills and helping fund procedures for families who couldn't afford them. He also made unannounced visits to children's hospitals, sometimes in disguise, spending time with patients and giving gifts without media attention. Much of this focus on children was tied to his upbringing under his father Joe Jackson, which he described as harsh and restrictive, and he often centered his philanthropy around giving children experiences he never had. In 2009, while preparing for his This Is It comeback shows, there were plans for continued charitable efforts tied to his performances, but he tragically died before the concerts could take place. This was the final footage of Chiara Giaconis just moments before she'd be tragically killed. In 2024 in Naples, Italy, 30-year-old Prada manager Chiara Giaconis was on what was supposed to be a dream birthday trip with her boyfriend when she was walking through a narrow street in the historic center. As they passed beneath an apartment balcony, a decorative stone statuette was suddenly thrown from above, striking her in the head with enough force to cause catastrophic injuries. She would end up tragically dying from the impact. Investigators determined the object had been thrown by a 13-year-old boy inside the apartment, who had reportedly been tossing several items from the balcony beforehand. But because he was under 14, he could not be criminally charged under Italian law, even though his actions led directly to her death. Prosecutors instead charged the boy's parents with manslaughter, arguing that the death was completely preventable and that they failed to properly supervise him. Parents have denied any wrongdoing, maintaining they couldn't have possibly anticipated what happened. As the case continues, the focus remains on whether their level of supervision meets the threshold for criminal responsibility in a situation where a single impulsive act turned fatal within seconds. In Philadelphia, Tammy Terrell began suffering severe migraines as a child after reportedly being assaulted at age 11. By 17, she was in a relationship with 30-year-old James Brown, who she later claimed physically abused her. In her early 20s, she became involved with David Ruffin, who she also described as violent, with accounts claiming he once struck her in the head with a motorcycle helmet. As her career with Marvin Gaye was taking off, she collapsed on stage in 1967, later diagnosed with a brain tumor. Over the next few years, she underwent multiple surgeries as the tumor kept returning. In March of 1970, at just 24 years old, she died after a long decline, with speculation that repeated head trauma may have contributed to or worsened her condition. In 2002, Michael was staying at a hotel in Berlin when he dangled his 9-month-old son blanket over his 4th-floor balcony. Jackson claimed he was simply excited and wanted to show off his baby to the fans below, but the media was quick to criticize Michael's parenting skills and life-threatening behavior. Jackson later apologized, stating that it was a mistaken judgment and that he didn't mean to endanger his son. Blanket is now 21 years old and rarely makes public appearances. Michael became increasingly reliant on medication after being prescribed painkillers following the 1984 burn incident. Over time, it expanded into a combination of sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, and sleep aids that he depended on just to function. He reportedly used aliases to obtain additional prescriptions without raising suspicion. But eventually, he lost the ability to sleep naturally, going long stretches without real rest unless he was chemically put under. In his later years, his physician Conrad Murray was administering propofol at home, effectively replacing sleep with anesthesia, leaving his entire routine built around cycles of medication and sedation. This was the moment a birthday party Spider-Man nearly died within seconds. He dives into the pool in full costume, but when he comes up, the mask is completely soaked and suctioned to his face. He quickly starts panicking and trying to breathe, while the kids think it's part of the act and continue splashing him. He gets out pretty quickly, but continues struggling to breathe since he can't free his face. He essentially waterboarded himself since the mask had trapped the water, making it impossible to breathe. Luckily, a few adults recognized what was happening and helped him pull the mask off before he suffocated. Here's a creepy clip of a dog making biting motions at its owner whenever she turns her back. Each time she turns away, the dog stiffens, locks onto her, and snaps at the air. According to vets online, this isn't playful behavior, but hesitation mixed with fear or low-level aggression. Dogs are more likely to test boundaries if they don't feel watched, especially if they're anxious or unsure. It's essentially a dog working up to a bite without fully committing, and trainers say behavior like this can escalate if it isn't addressed early on. In April of 2026, at a Spada Park in San Antonio, 24-year-old Atharva Vyas randomly attacked a woman and her 3-year-old daughter. Witnesses said he grabbed the mother by the hair and threw her to the ground, forcing her to drop the child. He then grabbed the toddler and began biting directly into her face, causing severe trauma and knocking out multiple teeth as she screamed in horror. The attack only stopped when a bystander intervened and managed to restrain him until police arrived. The child was rushed to the hospital in total shock, suffering serious facial injuries and lasting psychological trauma. Vyas was arrested at the scene and is facing multiple felony charges, including injury to a child. According to the Department of Homeland Security, he was in the United States illegally after his visa was revoked, and ICE has placed a detainer on him. As of now, the motive remains unclear, and the case is ongoing as the child continues recovery. Brad Pitt, best known for her roles in 1970s British horror films, was born in Guszka Petrov in Warsaw, Poland in 1937. During World War II, she and her mother were arrested and sent to Stutov concentration camp, where prisoners constantly faced starvation, forced labor, and executions. At one point, they were taken into nearby woods to be killed, but managed to escape amid the chaos. After Pitt later became a recognizable figure in British horror cinema, she suggested in interviews that surviving the Holocaust gave her a different relationship with fear, allowing her to portray terror and vulnerability on screen in a way that felt more grounded and real compared to typical performances in the genre. Exotic Adrian Street was a major figure in British professional wrestling in the 1960s and 70s, building a flamboyant, androgynous ring persona that later inspired artists like David Bowie. In 1971, he was booked in a staged exhibition wrestling match against Jimmy Savile, a TV personality who would occasionally step into the ring for publicity. Savile was already rumored behind the scenes to be prolifically abusing children, something the wrestler was aware of. Instead of playing along, Street turned the match into something real, aggressively grabbing Savile and ripping chunks of his hair out in front of the crowd. Decades later, after Savile's death exposed hundreds of victims and confirmed him as one of Britain's most prolific predators, that wrestling match took on a much darker meaning. What seemed like a wrestling stunt was one of the only times someone openly confronted him, while authorities and institutions were ignoring or failing to act on the horrific abuse. In 1993 in California, Michael Jackson was accused of sexually abusing 13-year-old Jordan Chandler, triggering one of the most invasive celebrity investigations ever. Authorities obtained a warrant to photograph and examine his body, attempting to match markings that were described by the boy. Reports later conflicted on how closely those descriptions aligned, becoming a key point of dispute. While the criminal case was developing, Jackson settled a civil lawsuit for over $20 million with no admission of guilt. After the settlement, Chandler declined to testify, leaving prosecutors without their central witness and resulting in no charges. Supporters saw this as a lack of evidence, while critics pointed to the payout as suspicious. Then in 2005, Jackson went to trial in Santa Maria, California over allegations involving 13-year-old Gavin Arvizo. Prosecutors claimed he groomed and abused the boy at Neverland Ranch, but the defense focused on inconsistencies in the family's timeline and credibility, claiming they had attempted to financially benefit from similar allegations before. After nearly 4 months of testimony and about 30 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted Michael on all counts. The allegations left a lasting divide. Some former child visitors to Neverland have consistently denied any abuse and defended Michael, including Macaulay Culkin and Corey Feldman, along with other former young actors who have been very outspoken about abuse in the industry but say Michael never would have harmed them. Others point to multiple accusations over time and the 1993 settlement as reasons they believe otherwise. Michael denied all allegations up until his death in 2009, leaving the issue unresolved between a legal record that cleared him and a public debate that never settled. Lance Armstrong built one of the most inspiring comeback stories in sports after surviving advanced testicular cancer and winning 7 straight Tour de France titles from 1999 to 2005. But behind the scenes, he was running a coordinated doping program involving performance-enhancing drugs and blood transfusions, while aggressively denying accusations and discrediting anyone who spoke out. In 2012, the United States Anti-Doping Agency exposed the scheme, calling it one of the most sophisticated doping operations in sports history. Armstrong was eventually stripped of all 7 titles and banned for life. Sponsors dropped him, his reputation collapsed, and in 2013 he admitted the truth in an interview with Oprah Winfrey, turning a cancer survival legacy into one of the most infamous falls from grace in sports. In 2003 in Rafah, British filmmaker James Miller was shot and killed while filming the documentary Death in Gaza. On his final night, he and his crew left a damaged home wearing TV-marked gear, waving a white flag and identifying themselves as journalists as Israeli forces sat roughly 100 meters away. A warning shot was fired but missed. Then seconds later, a second round struck Miller in the neck from the front, killing him. An autopsy confirmed the trajectory and linked the bullet to Israeli-issued ammo, contradicting claims of Palestinian fire. The Israeli military closed the case with no charges, citing insufficient evidence, despite later findings suggesting clear visibility. A UK court pointed to evidence of intentional killing, but no prosecution followed. The case was officially closed in 2009 after compensation was paid to his family. The results of Michael Jackson's autopsy report were nothing short of disturbing. He was largely bald with only sparse hair remaining, the result of burns and repeated cosmetic procedures, as he'd been wearing a wig in public for years. His scalp also showed scarring consistent with past injuries. He had multiple cosmetic tattoos, including permanent eyeliner and lip liner, likely done to maintain his appearance without daily makeup. His skin also showed signs of vitiligo alongside extensive cosmetic alteration. His arms were marked with numerous puncture wounds consistent with frequent injections over time. Toxicology findings showed multiple drugs in his system and partially dissolved pills in his stomach, indicating recent ingestion. The cause of death was ruled acute propofol intoxication, a powerful surgical anesthetic. In the final months of his life, Michael was given propofol regularly inside his home to induce sleep, essentially relying on anesthesia instead of natural slumber. His personal physician, Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the drug outside of proper medical care. In June of 2023, in the North Atlantic Ocean near the Titanic wreck site, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Sulman were among those killed when the Titan submersible suddenly imploded. Nearly 9 months later, after recovery efforts at extreme depths, small amounts of human remains were returned to the family. Identified through DNA testing, the material was described by Shahzada's wife as the slush that was left delivered in 2 small shoeboxes. Due to the conditions of the implosion and the environment, the remains were limited and heavily fragmented, with some of the recovered material being mixed together, meaning it could not be definitively attributed to one specific individual. In Rochester, New York in 2022, a woman installed a hidden trail cam at her mother's grave after noticing it kept being disturbed. The footage soon captured her father, the woman's ex-husband, returning to the cemetery and urinating directly on the grave multiple times per week. The behavior had been going on for at least several months, and likely closer to a year or more before it was caught on camera. In multiple clips, his partner could be seen waiting nearby in a car while he carried out the act. Police were contacted, but the case fell into a gray area legally, with any charges depending on local cemetery regulation. The situation drew attention for the sustained, deliberate nature of the acts, targeting the grave long after the relationship had ended. Just recently, Ed Sheeran revealed he'd been dealing with shingles for about a month, a painful viral infection caused by the reactivation of the chickenpox virus. The outbreak affected his scalp, causing burning nerve pain and blistering rashes severe enough that he shaved his head to manage it. Shingles attacks nerve pathways in the skin, and when it spreads across the scalp, even light contact can cause intense burning. Hair can trap heat, irritate the lesions, and make treatment difficult, so shaving it off helps reduce constant pain and allows medication to be applied directly. While not usually fatal, shingles can leave lasting nerve damage, with some people experiencing chronic pain long after the rash disappears. In Istanbul, Ali Sifsi suffered a catastrophic head injury while confronting a burglar, leaving a large section of his skull fractured and missing, with parts of his brain left dangerously exposed. Emergency surgery stabilized him, but a huge portion of his skull could not be saved. To rebuild it, surgeons performed detailed scans of his remaining skull and designed a patient-specific implant, 3D printing a curved titanium plate to precisely replace the missing bone. During reconstruction, the metal implant was secured directly to his skull, effectively acting as a permanent substitute for the lost bone, protecting his brain while permanently altering the structure of his head. 2 days before his death, he said this:
"Every day that I have on earth is a gift and a blessing, and I'm very grateful for that, because frankly, people are disappearing. Scientists are going missing. Now they're saying they're going to investigate this. The president himself is saying they're going to look into this and see if anything's going on. It's a little bit scary."
That was David Wilcock, a paranormal author and Ancient Aliens contributor, known for claims about UFOs, hidden technology, and government cover-ups. In the video, he referenced a series of recent deaths and disappearances tied to researchers and scientists in space, energy, and defense fields that he and many others believed were connected. Just 2 days later, on April 20th, 2026, in Colorado, deputies responded to a crisis call. Authorities said Wilcock was found outside with a weapon and died shortly after police arrived. His death was officially ruled a suicide. In 2019, aboard the Disney Dream in the Atlantic Ocean, a 5-year-old girl climbed onto a porthole railing for a photo and fell nearly 50 feet into the ocean below. Her father jumped in after her seconds later, hitting the water hard, before swimming to her and keeping her above the surface as the ship drifted on. With no flotation device and surrounded by open sea, they remained in the water until crew launched a rescue boat to pull them out. Both miraculously survived as the girl was treated for hypothermia, while her father suffered serious injuries, including a fractured spine from the impact with the water. This was the moment an MMA fighter was forced to face off against an aggressive dog. When a large unleashed pit bull suddenly charges straight at him, he reacts quickly, putting the dog in a headlock while keeping its jaws away from his face and neck. He stays calm the entire time, controlling the dog's movement on the ground like he's in a match. Luckily, the dog had a weak ground game. A few seconds later, the owner finally shows up and manages to control his massive dog. The guy walks away completely unscathed, and it's pretty clear his wrestling background is the only reason this didn't end much worse. In 2024 in Minnesota, an 18-year-old driver reported that his Honda Pilot began accelerating on its own and wouldn't slow down, even when he used the brakes and emergency brake. The SUV reached speeds over 110 miles per hour and continued for over 20 minutes, crossing into North Dakota while the driver remained on the phone with 911. As he was approaching a dead end, authorities coordinated a controlled intervention, using police vehicles to safely bring the SUV to a stop without a high-speed crash. Miraculously, the driver was not seriously injured, and the incident ended without any fatalities, though the cause of the malfunction has never been determined. In 1989, in Bangkok, Thailand, Billy Idol went on a drug-fueled binge after a breakup that spiraled out of control. Later admitted the trip involved heroin, alcohol, and heavy tranquilizer use, leaving him erratic and destructive. He reportedly trashed multiple luxury hotel suites, leaving behind severe damage and hundreds of thousands of dollars in unpaid bills. The situation soon escalated to the point where authorities were forced to intervene. Billy later said he was tranquilized and strapped to a military stretcher before being carried out and deported, with the Thai army reportedly involved in carrying him out. Idol has since described the incident as one of the lowest points of his life, driven by severe drug abuse and a reckless lifestyle that nearly destroyed him. In 1999, in Towanda, Pennsylvania, 11-year-old Adam Herman disappeared from his adoptive home. No missing persons report was filed at the time. For years afterward, his adoptive parents told family he was returned to state custody, while continuing to claim him as a dependent on taxes, legal filings, and collecting adoptive subsidy payments. In 2008, after his adoptive sister tried to reconnect with him as an adult, she discovered records falsely showed he had lived with the family until age 18. She then reported him missing nearly a decade after he vanished. The adoptive parents were later convicted of fraud for collecting thousands in payments after his disappearance, but no one has ever been charged in connection with what happened to Adam, as his fate remains unknown. This was the terrifying moment a driver realized he was about to be carjacked. He turns down a narrow street at night and is immediately met by a group of men waving weapons that look like machetes. But instead of backing out, he moves forward, only to realize the road has been deliberately blocked. 2 large tanker trucks are positioned on the street, and a fallen tree is laid out between them, leaving almost no way through. Within seconds, the men rush the car and start smashing the windows, trying to force their way inside. The driver panics but stays moving, squeezing the car through a tight gap along the side of the road, barely clearing the obstacles as the attackers were closing in. He manages to break past them and speed off before they can get the doors open. Incidents like this are a known tactic across parts of the world where organized roadside robberies happen frequently, with criminals blocking roads to trap drivers before surrounding the vehicle. It's not clear where this particular clip took place, but the setup matches methods that have been commonly reported across the globe. I got nothing else to say. What are you still doing here? Get out of here. 2010 in Philadelphia, federal agents and local authorities raided a clinic run by Kermit Gosnell, initially suspecting it was operating as a pill mill. What they found inside was far more horrific than illegal prescriptions. Investigators reported a pervasive stench, filthy conditions, and blood-stained equipment left uncleaned. The clinic was described as so unsanitary that several agents said they felt physically ill while searching it. As the investigation expanded, it was revealed that Gosnell had been performing late-term abortions under dangerous conditions, often far outside legal limitations. According to testimony, babies born alive were killed by severing their spinal cords. Untrained staff were heavily involved in procedures, and essential medical standards were ignored. Authorities also found fetal remains scattered throughout the clinic, including in a freezer, jars, bags, and plastic jugs. The grand jury later described the place as a baby charnel house. In 2013, Gosnell was convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder, including the deaths of the infants born alive, as well as involuntary manslaughter in the death of one of his patients. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In 2013, in Los Angeles, California, 15-year-old Paris Jackson was hospitalized after a serious self-harm attempt. It came 4 years after the 2009 death of her father, Michael Jackson, during a period where she was dealing with intense grief, constant media attention, online harassment, and widespread public speculation that she wasn't biologically his daughter. She was placed under psychiatric care following the incident, marking one of the lowest points in her life after losing her father. When Michael died in 2009 in Los Angeles, it was revealed his finances were far worse than people realized. Despite his global fame, he was reportedly $500 million in debt, tied to massive loans, legal costs, and the upkeep of assets like Neverland Ranch. His death triggered a complex financial collapse behind the scenes, forcing his estate into an immediate battle to stabilize what he left behind. Immediately after his death, Michael's body was held for weeks during autopsies and investigations, and kept in a private mausoleum as family disputes and legal issues delayed the funeral. His public memorial at Staples Center drew millions, ending with his daughter Paris Jackson breaking down in tears in one of the only times she ever spoke publicly.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
But even after he was finally laid to rest more than 2 months later, his death triggered years of lawsuits, accusations, and renewed abuse claims, including those reignited by the documentary Leaving Neverland. Instead of closure, everything around him only grew more disputed, leaving behind a legacy that's still being argued over long after his death. In 2019, a man in rural Australia was gored to death by his own pet deer, an animal he had raised for years. It happened during mating season, when even normally tame stags can turn violently territorial. The deer charged without warning, slamming its antlers into him repeatedly and fatally wounding him. When his wife ran over to help, the animal attacked her too, leaving her critically injured before police shot it dead. Deer attacks are extremely rare, but during rutting season, even a beloved pet can turn into a deadly threat. In 2010, at Vortex Spring in Florida, 30-year-old Ben McDaniel entered the site's underwater cave system alone. The cave is known for tight, winding passages that require specialized training. McDaniel apparently went past safety restrictions into deeper sections and never resurfaced. Days later, his scuba tanks were found inside the caves, but despite multiple recovery attempts, his body has never been located. His disappearance remains unsolved, as he likely became trapped deep within the cave system, essentially swallowed by the cave itself, where recovery is impossible. This was the moment a climber completely lost control while descending Mount Risi. On a steep, snow-covered slope, he slipped, dropped his ice axe, and instantly lost his only way of stopping himself. Within seconds, he was tumbling head over heels down a roughly 45-degree incline, sliding and cartwheeling for nearly 600 meters while another climber's headcam captured the entire thing. But miraculously, after the uncontrolled slide finally stopped, he was somehow still conscious. He survived with only bruises and minor pain in his finger, and after being checked by a doctor in the group, he was able to stand up and walk down the mountain himself. This was the horrifying moment an Instagram free climber was forced into a dangerous descent while scaling an electrical tower. With no harness, no clips, and nothing but a strong grip keeping him alive, he was already hundreds of feet above the ground when a massive swarm of bees suddenly surrounded him. As the bees began attacking, he couldn't panic or swat them away without risking his life. Every movement had to stay controlled, since one small shift of weight could have easily sent him falling straight down. But despite the chaos, he maintained his composure, descending level by level, until he finally reached a safe enough height to jump and escape the swarm. After becoming the most famous child star in the world through Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin spent years spiraling out of the spotlight. He became trapped in a bitter legal battle with his parents over control of his fortune, and later admitted to struggling with drugs and heavy drinking, while tabloids became obsessed with photos of his alarmingly thin appearance, constantly pushing rumors that he was addicted to heroin or even close to death, claims he consistently denied. For years, the former child star became more known for looking sick and gaunt than for the blockbuster movies that made him an icon. And in 2017, he met Brenda Song, someone who could relate to his struggles that stemmed from child acting. Over the following years, Culkin appeared significantly healthier and more stable, eventually crediting Brenda and their family life with giving him purpose again. The two later had children together, and during his Hollywood Walk of Fame speech, he told her, "You've given me all my purpose again. You've given me family." This was the moment a man begged for his life after becoming trapped inside a white tiger enclosure at a zoo in New Delhi, India. After reportedly crossing a safety barrier and falling 18 feet into a moat surrounding the exhibit, 20-year-old Maksud backed himself against a wall as a massive white tiger named Vijay slowly approached him. Witnesses watched in horror as the terrified man put his hands together in a pleading gesture and begged to be spared while the tiger stood just inches away, appearing to contemplate what to do. For several minutes, the animal appeared strangely calm while crowds of people screamed and threw rocks in a desperate attempt to distract it. But the commotion eventually agitated the tiger, which suddenly lunged at Maksud, grabbed him by the neck, and dragged him across the enclosure in front of horrified visitors. By the time zoo staff regained control of the situation, the 20-year-old man had already died from catastrophic neck injuries and suffocation. Vijay was not killed afterward, with zoo officials stating the tiger had simply acted on instinct after a person entered his enclosure. This was the moment a zookeeper made a big mistake while working inside a panda enclosure at Chongqing Zoo in China, as 9-year-old panda Ding Ding tried walking through a restricted doorway. The keeper rushed to slam the metal door shut before the animal could get through, accidentally slamming it directly onto the panda's paw. Almost instantly, Ding Ding appeared to become agitated. The panda began chasing the terrified keeper around the enclosure while horrified visitors could do nothing but watch. Soon enough, the 250-pound bear managed to tackle her to the ground, thrashing at her legs and arms while appearing to briefly bite her. The keeper began to scream in terror before she was able to eventually free herself from the grapple. Attacks involving giant pandas are considered extremely rare, especially in zoos, because the animals are normally very calm and spend most of their time eating bamboo or sleeping. But despite their peaceful reputation, pandas are still bears with incredibly powerful jaws and enough bite force to crush bone when provoked or frightened. Despite how violent the footage looked, the zookeeper only suffered minor injuries and was treated at a hospital. The zoo later stated that Ding Ding showed no signs of ongoing aggression afterward and was behaving normally. Tyke was a circus elephant that had spent years performing in traveling shows across the United States. Former handlers later claimed she showed repeated signs of stress and aggression after 12 years of harsh training, confinement, and constant transport. On August 20th, 1994, during a live circus performance in Honolulu, Tyke suddenly became agitated and attacked her trainer in front of the audience, killing him and severely injuring another handler before smashing through an exit and escaping into the streets. Panicked bystanders watched as the elephant rampaged through downtown Honolulu for nearly 30 minutes as police chased her through traffic. Officers eventually shot Tyke 86 times before she finally collapsed and died in the street. The incident later became one of the most infamous examples used by animal rights activists campaigning against performances of circus animals. Here's a photo of Filipina resistance leader and former schoolteacher Nieves Fernandez showing a U.S. Army private how she used a bolo knife to kill Japanese soldiers during the occupation of the Philippines in World War II. Fernandez helped lead a guerrilla resistance force after Japan invaded the country and was reportedly so feared by Japanese troops that a bounty was placed on her head. Historical accounts credit her unit with killing more than 200 Japanese soldiers during the war.
My name is Kayla Mueller. I need your help. I've been here too long. I've been very sick. It's very terrifying here.
That was Kayla Mueller, an American aid worker from Arizona who traveled to the Middle East to help refugees and civilians affected by the Syrian civil war before she was kidnapped by ISIS and held hostage for nearly 18 months. According to reports, she was repeatedly raped and sexually abused by ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who allegedly treated her as his personal captive and sex slave and moved her between ISIS compounds across Syria to avoid rescue attempts. The footage shown here was part of a proof-of-life video released by ISIS, showing Mueller appearing terrified as she pleaded to be brought home. In 2015, ISIS claimed she was killed in a Jordanian airstrike, though U.S. officials later said there was no evidence the strike hit the building where she was being held, leading many to believe ISIS itself most likely killed her. This was the moment an idiot tried crossing train tracks with his bike just seconds before a train came roaring through. As the crossing lights flashed, he suddenly tripped and fell directly onto the tracks in the path of the oncoming train. But he managed to grab his bike and escape just moments before the train came flying past him. He managed to escape literally a half a second before the several hundred-ton locomotive would have almost certainly turned him into human paste upon impact. Speaking of idiots, this man just narrowly avoided being sliced in half by a circular saw. He was apparently cutting into wall tile when he suddenly slipped, causing him to fall directly on top of it. Somehow, the saw barely missed his stomach and torso, as he even had to lift his shirt to make sure his intestines were still inside his body. This was the moment a family hanging out in their driveway suddenly realized they weren't alone when a massive black bear casually pulled up behind them. Ring camera footage captured the exact second one of the kids spotted the animal and softly yelled "bear" before immediately abandoning the rest of the family to save himself first. Within seconds, everyone ran to the door while the bear continued minding his own business. Although black bears are usually shy and avoid humans, they can become extremely dangerous if cornered, startled, or provoked, especially around food or cubs. Guy Pennington nearly died after ignoring what he thought was just a sore throat for over a month. In 2023, the infection turned out to be a massive throat abscess that became so severe it started blocking his airway, leaving him struggling to breathe. Pennington was rushed to the ICU, intubated, and flown to another hospital for emergency surgery. He later said doctors told him he easily could have died if he waited any longer to get treatment. In the early days of cars, drivers who killed pedestrians were often blamed for what newspapers called motor killings. But as deaths began to rise in the 1920s, automobile companies pushed the term jaywalker to shift blame onto pedestrians, helping normalize the idea that people hit by cars were at fault for their own deaths. The Cave Creek disaster occurred in 1995 at Paparoa National Park in New Zealand, when 17 people crowded onto a newly built viewing platform overlooking Cave Creek on a field trip. The structure suddenly tore away from the cliffside and collapsed forward, sending the group plunging nearly 40 meters onto the rocks below. 14 people were killed, most of them university students, while the survivors suffered devastating injuries. Investigators later discovered the platform had been catastrophically poorly built, with several missing bolts and critical structural flaws. However, no individual was ever criminally convicted over the disaster. Staying at an Airbnb in Virginia in July of 2024, Joe Bartolozzi revealed that he was bitten by a Lone Star tick, a species linked to alpha-gal syndrome, a bizarre condition that can suddenly make people severely allergic to red meat after a single tick bite. Joe said he began experiencing symptoms consistent with the condition, meaning foods he had eaten his entire life could now potentially trigger hives, vomiting, breathing problems, or even anaphylactic shock hours after eating them. He later said the symptoms eventually improved, though some victims remain allergic to meat for years or even permanently. In 2004, 24-year-old American college student David Snedon vanished while hiking alone through China's Tiger Leaping Gorge in Yunnan province and was initially presumed dead after search teams found no trace of him. But years later, multiple defectors and South Korean intelligence sources claimed Snedon had actually been abducted by North Korea and forced to work as an English tutor for younger Kim Jong-un. North Korea denied the allegations, and Snedon's disappearance remains officially unsolved. This eerie burial suit from China's Liao dynasty was made between the 10th and 11th centuries, using woven silver wire, a bronze mask, and a metal crown to encase the dead. Elite members of the dynasty were sometimes buried in elaborate metal suits like this because it was believed they could help preserve the body and protect the soul in the afterlife. A 700-year-old statue of the Hindu god Ganesha sits perched on top of Indonesia's active Mount Bromo volcano, where it has overlooked smoke, ash, and eruptions for centuries, as part of a sacred ancient site used by local Tenggerese worshippers. In 2024, researchers using LiDAR scans in Ecuador's Upano Valley revealed the hidden remains of a massive 2,500-year-old civilization buried beneath the Amazon rainforest, including huge networks of roads, plazas, homes, and agricultural structures that had remained completely concealed under dense jungle for centuries. Archaeologists say the site is so enormous that only a small portion has been studied so far, and future excavations could uncover far more about the lost civilization and how millions of people may have once lived deep within the Amazon. This heartbreaking photo shows Chinese kidnapping victim Yang Niuhua learning that both of her parents had died years earlier after spending decades searching for her following her abduction as a child. Yang was kidnapped at just 5 years old in Guizhou, China in the 1990s and trafficked far from her hometown, only discovering 26 years later that her devastated father had become an alcoholic and died just 2 years after she vanished, while her mother later died as a result of severe depression and grief, never knowing her daughter was still alive. Years later, Yu's relentless pursuit of justice helped track down her kidnapper Yu Huang, a trafficker linked to at least 17 abducted children, ultimately leading to Yu's conviction and death sentence. In Manila, there are long-standing reports of people living in the city's drainage tunnels, often called the Mole People. These communities are made up of homeless families, runaway kids, and people avoiding police or poverty on the surface. Outreach workers have found makeshift shelters built along the concrete wall, children with severe light sensitivity from spending so much time underground, and tunnels where the air is thick with sewage and rats. During heavy rains, flash floods run through the system without warning, and entire encampments have been washed out, with bodies sometimes recovered blocks away. This was the moment panic spread through a packed subway train after a man suddenly began spraying an unknown substance into the crowded carriage. As the mist spread through the enclosed train car, confused passengers started covering their faces and frantically trying to move away. Though some reports called it an irritant spray, many online viewers speculated that it may have instead been some kind of prank fart spray. The incident reportedly happened aboard a subway train in Guangzhou, China. The man involved was soon detained by authorities after the incident, though his motive remains unclear. This was the moment a German shepherd found himself dangling off the edge of a high apartment balcony after laying too close to the edge and slipping underneath the metal railing. Trapped several stories above the ground, the terrified dog desperately tried to hold himself up using only his front paws as his back legs hung helplessly in the air. With nothing to grip onto to pull himself back up, the dog could do nothing but hang on for dear life. If he lost his grip, the fall could have easily killed him or left him severely injured. But suddenly, the exhausted dog noticed his owner becoming aware of the situation and immediately started wagging his tail. Luckily, the woman rushed over and pulled him to safety just moments before the dog became too tired to hang on. In August of 2007, 20-year-old goth woman Sophie Lancaster was walking through Stubby Lee Park in Bacup, England with her boyfriend Robert Maltby when a group of teenagers suddenly targeted the couple simply because of their appearance. The attackers brutally beat both of them before repeatedly stomping on Sophie's head as she lay defenseless on the ground, with one attacker later admitting they kicked her head like a football. Sophie fell into a coma and died from catastrophic brain injuries 13 days later, while Robert survived despite suffering severe injuries and memory loss from the attack. The case horrified Britain and became one of the country's most infamous hate crime murders, sparking nationwide debates about violence against alternative subcultures. Ryan Herbert, one of the main attackers, was convicted of Sophie's murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years, while another attacker, Brendan Harris, received a life sentence for manslaughter with a minimum term of 18 years after an appeal increased his punishment. This was the moment a stray cat hung on for dear life from the upper deck of Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, barely holding on as thousands of people watched. It happened during a college football game when the cat slipped from the edge and ended up dangling several stories above the crowd, but fans below luckily reacted fast, stretching out an American flag just seconds before it fell. The cat dropped straight into it, bounced once, and miraculously walked away unscathed. This was the moment a woman came face to face with a silverback gorilla. Despite their size and strength, gorillas are generally calm and non-aggressive animals. In the wild, attacks are extremely rare and only happen if they feel threatened, cornered, or if someone challenges them. One of the biggest triggers is direct eye contact, which gorillas can interpret as a sign of aggression or dominance. That's why guides often tell people to stay still, avoid sudden movements, and never lock eyes with a silverback. Instead, looking slightly away and remaining calm signals that you're not a threat. The gorilla will typically observe, then move on. In 2024 in Los Angeles, California, 23-year-old YouTuber Tumad, whose real name was Medea Sadiq, was found dead inside his home after a welfare check was requested when he'd gone silent for several days. Authorities discovered his body in a state of decomposition, indicating he had likely been dead for some time before anyone realized. The death was later linked to a suspected drug overdose, with reports of substances found at the scene. In the months leading up to his death, Tumad had posted increasingly erratic and concerning content online, including references to drug use and disturbing behavior. Despite having millions of followers and a massive online presence, he died alone unnoticed until the smell coming from his residence prompted concern. Donald Miller disappeared in Ohio in 1986 to escape debt and alcoholism, and was declared legally dead in 1994 so his ex-wife could collect Social Security benefits for their children. Years later, he resurfaced and appeared in court in 2013 asking to be declared alive again. The judge ruled that under Ohio law, a death declaration cannot be reversed after 3 years, meaning that despite standing in the courtroom alive, Miller was legally considered dead. As a result, he was left unable to get a driver's license, Social Security number, or legally work, effectively existing outside the system with no clear way to reverse his status. Bob Odenkirk collapsed on the set of Better Call Saul in 2021 after suffering a sudden heart attack caused by a buildup of plaque in his arteries that had gone undetected for years. In cases like this, fatty deposits can silently narrow the arteries until one ruptures, triggering a complete blockage that cuts off blood flow to the heart. He was unconscious for several minutes and required immediate CPR and defibrillation to be revived. Without that rapid response, the chances of survival dropped dramatically within minutes. Odenkirk later revealed he had likely been living with the condition for over a decade without even realizing. In 1989 over Iowa, United Airlines Flight 232 lost all hydraulic control after its tail engine catastrophically failed, leaving the pilots with virtually no way to steer. Using only uneven thrust from the remaining engines, the crew managed to guide the aircraft toward a runway and attempt a landing. The plane broke apart on impact, killing 112 of the 296 people on board, but 184 survived in what is widely considered to be one of the most impressive landings in aviation history. Investigators later found that even highly trained pilots failed to replicate the landing in simulators. The disaster became a turning point for aviation safety in the years to come. In April of 2026, in the village of Hagenbach in eastern France, police responded to a neighbor's report of sounds of a child coming from a parked utility van. When they opened it, they found a 9-year-old boy alive but in shocking condition, completely unclothed, lying in fetal position on a mound of trash and waste, severely malnourished with very pale skin, and muscles so atrophied from prolonged confinement that he could no longer walk or stand. The boy had been locked inside the van since November of 2024, over 16 months. To neighbors and others, he had simply disappeared, with the family claiming he no longer lived there. His 43-year-old father admitted to keeping the child confined, saying it was to protect him from his partner, who allegedly wanted to place the boy in psychiatric care. The father was charged with kidnapping and deprivation of care, while his 37-year-old partner was also charged for failing to intervene. The boy was hospitalized and his siblings were removed from the home as the investigation continues. This was the moment a young boy with autism was seen walking alone on a monorail track at Hershey Park, dozens of feet above the ground. He'd been missing for about 20 minutes after getting separated from his family, and somehow made his way onto the restricted area of the monorail. People below him started shouting in panic, trying to guide him, but he seemed overwhelmed and confused and kept changing direction along the narrow track. Thankfully, one man rushed over, climbed onto a nearby structure, and pulled himself up onto the track. He carefully approached the boy, picked him up, and carried him back to safety before eventually reuniting him with his parents. This was the moment a boy was suddenly electrocuted after touching a metal door in a condominium courtyard. What looked like a normal exit somehow became live with electricity, locking his muscles in place and leaving him unable to let go. Within seconds, his friend realized what was happening and grabbed him by the legs to pull him free. In situations like this, the safest option is always to cut the power or use something non-conductive to separate them. But when there's no time and someone is actively being electrocuted, people sometimes resort to physically tackling them to break the contact. Cases like this are almost always caused by faulty wiring or poor grounding. Steven Stucker, best known for playing the chaotic air controller in Airplane, died in 1986 at just 38 years old due to complications with AIDS. At the time, the disease was still poorly understood, widely feared, and heavily stigmatized, especially within the entertainment industry. He publicly revealed his diagnosis in 1985, making him one of the first recognizable entertainers to speak openly about having AIDS during a period when many kept it hidden out of fear of backlash and discrimination. Like many early AIDS patients, his condition quickly deteriorated before any effective treatments existed. His death came at a time when thousands were dying under similar circumstances, helping to bring more visibility to a crisis that had long been ignored. In 1978, in Birmingham, England, medical photographer Janet Parker became the last person to die from smallpox after being exposed at the University of Birmingham Medical School, likely through airborne transmission from a laboratory working with the virus just one floor below her office. She developed symptoms days later and died on September 11th after several weeks in isolation. The outbreak triggered a massive public health response, including quarantines and emergency vaccines, but no further cases spread beyond Janet. During the crisis, her father suffered a fatal heart attack while visiting her in the hospital. The laboratory's head, Professor Henry Bedson, later died by suicide amid intense scrutiny over the incident. Here's an image showing what the sinking of the Titanic would have actually looked like on April 15, 1912. It was a moonless night in the North Atlantic, and once the ship's power failed, the massive liner disappeared into near total darkness, leaving over 1,500 people unable to clearly see the ship, the lifeboats, or even each other. Many survivors later reported hearing screams from the water but couldn't see anything, as the lack of light turned the disaster into something disorienting and almost invisible. It wasn't just the freezing temperatures that made it so horrifying, it was also the darkness, where one of the worst disasters in maritime history unfolded out of sight. In 1922, a young girl with severe diabetes was photographed while essentially waiting to die, at a time when the condition was almost always fatal, especially in children. Before there was any treatment, patients were often placed on near-starvation diets to slow the disease, leaving them dangerously weak while their bodies continued to deteriorate. That same year, doctors administered a new experimental treatment called insulin, one of the first times it had ever been used on a human. Within days, patients who were expected to die began to recover. The discovery transformed diabetes from a death sentence into a manageable condition almost overnight. Hugh Jackman has had multiple basal cell carcinomas removed, a type of skin cancer caused by long-term UV exposure. These cancers often start off as small, easy-to-miss spots, but can slowly grow deeper into surrounding tissue if left untreated, in some cases eroding skin and underlying structures. His repeated diagnoses suggest damage that continues to surface years after the initial exposure. While rarely fatal, basal cell carcinoma can quietly develop, recur, and progressively invade tissue, making it more serious than most people realize. He's since used his experience to warn others about the dangers of UV exposure, regularly urging people to wear sunscreen and get their skin checked. In 2004 in South Africa, trophy hunter Ryan Naud, who ran Pro Hunt Africa and was known for killing endangered animals, was found dead beside his broken-down truck on a remote road. His vehicle had overheated, leaving him stranded and alone. When police arrived, he was lying next to the truck with multiple gunshot wounds, suggesting he had been approached at close range and executed. There were no clear signs of a struggle, and his belongings were left behind, making the motive unclear. Many speculate the killing was retaliatory due to his work killing protected wildlife, but no suspects were ever identified and the case remains unsolved. During the 2021 Kabylia wildfires in Algeria, Ben Ismail, a 38-year-old musician who had traveled hundreds of miles to volunteer to help, was falsely accused by locals of starting the fires. Police initially sheltered him inside a station, but a crowd broke in, dragged him into the street, and killed him in a frenzy of violence before setting his body on fire. The killing was filmed and spread online, allowing authorities to later identify dozens involved. In 2022, 49 people were sentenced to death and others to prison terms for their roles in the senseless attack. A 34-year-old orangutan at the Metro Richmond Zoo in Virginia named Patrick was given a royal cloak for his birthday, and without any training, he tied it around himself like a wearable outfit. Orangutans are already known for advanced problem-solving and tool use, but moments like this show just how far that intelligence can go. Instead of playing with it, Patrick used the fabric with a clear purpose. It's a small moment, but it highlights the level of cognitive ability orangutans are capable of. This orb weaver spider had nowhere to attach the bottom of its web, so it made its own anchor. With no stable point to build from, it picked up a small rock and used it to hold the entire structure together. Orb weavers are known for their precise, almost mechanical construction, but this goes beyond instinct. It shows they can adjust their strategy when conditions change, solving problems in real time. In this case, the spider effectively created a solution to the missing piece of its environment, creatively allowing it to hunt in a place it otherwise couldn't have. Why is he doing that, though? According to serial killer Danny Rolling, here's a list of things you can do to avoid being murdered by a serial killer. Park your car in the light. Buy yourself a .38 caliber revolver. Get a permit to carry it on your person and keep it in your handbag where it's easy to get to. Buy some mace on a keychain and have it ready when you get out of your car. If your bedroom window doesn't have a screen, get one and nail it to the windowsill. Place a bunch of empty glass bottles in the windows. Get you some curtains. Buy a deadbolt and put it on your bedroom door so you can lock yourself in. Sleep with your .38 caliber revolver under your pillow. It won't go off by accident. If someone bothers you, don't ever let an attacker get control. Fight for your life. Scream as loud as you can. Spray mace in his face. Kick him in the balls. Scratch at his eyes. Pull out your .38 caliber and blow him away. Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper, murdered 5 college students in Florida in 1990. Breaking into their apartments at night and targeting them while they were alone. He was later captured, sentenced to death, and executed by lethal injection in 2006. This is the sunburst appearance of osteosarcoma, the most common form of bone cancer. The pattern forms when the tumor grows so aggressively that it forces new bone to shoot outward in sharp radiating spikes. It's most often seen in teenagers and young adults, typically in long bones like the femur near the knee. As it advances, the cancer can hollow out and weaken the bone from the inside, leading to intense pain, swelling, and sometimes sudden fractures under normal pressure. Even with treatment, it can quickly spread to the lungs, making it a particularly fast-moving and devastating disease. In 1974 in Memphis, R&B singer Al Green was attacked by his girlfriend Mary Woodson after he refused to marry her. As he was getting ready for bed, she poured a pot of boiling grits all over him, leaving him with severe second-degree burns across his torso. He reportedly ran through the house screaming in pain before collapsing. Moments later, Woodson locked herself in another room and turned the gun on herself. Green survived but required extensive recovery, and the incident became one of the most disturbing and defining moments of his life. Jim Carrey's family lost their home when he was just a teenager, forcing them to live out of a van while he worked overnight janitor shifts after school to help keep them afloat financially. The stress of that period led him to start performing stand-up at a young age, using comedy as a way to cope with instability and support his family, often bombing hard early on before eventually developing his stage presence. But after becoming one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood, he developed severe depression that he later said had been building for years beneath the surface of his success. He's spoken openly about relying on medication during that time, but eventually stepped away from it and began focusing on understanding the root of what he was experiencing rather than just masking the symptoms. Instead of keeping those struggles private, he described depression in interviews as a form of exhaustion from maintaining a version of yourself that doesn't align with reality, helping people better understand what it can feel like internally. He's consistently used interviews, speeches, and even his own artwork to talk about mental health, identity, and emotional burnout, often encouraging people to confront those issues directly and not define themselves solely by external success. Later in his career, Jim shifted away from constant mainstream roles and focused more on personal expression and selective projects, openly prioritizing his mental state over maintaining the level of fame he had achieved earlier in his career. Just yesterday, on April 19, 2026, in Shreveport, Louisiana, 31-year-old Army National Guard veteran Shamar Elkins killed 8 children, 7 of them his own, after a domestic dispute with his wife, who he was in the process of separating from. Just hours before the attack, he'd been posting photos online, including one about spending time with his daughter, and nothing about it suggested anything was wrong or that something horrific was about to happen. Early that morning, he shot his wife first, who survived, and then went to another home where the children were and killed all 8 of them. Several were shot while asleep in their beds, and at least one child tried to escape but was still killed. The victims ranged from very young children to preteens. In the time leading up to it, family members said he'd been dealing with mental health struggles and what they described as dark thoughts. He also had a prior firearm-related arrest in 2019, but no clear single motive has been confirmed beyond the domestic situation escalating. Afterward, he fled the scene, carjacked a vehicle, and led police on a chase before being shot and killed by 2 officers. 2 adults survived the shooting with critical injuries, and the killings became one of the deadliest mass shootings involving children in recent U.S. history.